A 1998 family car could be neglected for years and still start every morning. A modern 1.2-litre turbo can have a full service book, low mileage, and still end up with an oil pressure warning, a timing belt repair, or a bill that makes the owner wonder what went wrong. The easy answer is that modern engines are built to fail. It is also the answer that stops you from seeing the real danger. Modern engines do not usually fail early because they are small. They fail early when a highly stressed, tightly engineered system is treated like the old, forgiving engine it replaced. The oil is wrong. The service interval fits the brochure, but not the journey. A warning is ignored. Or a buyer assumes that every 1.2-litre engine in a Fiat, Jeep or Citroën must be the same engine with the same risk. Imagine Daniel. He's buying a 3-year-old crossover. It has only 32,000 miles, a stamped service record and a low monthly payment. He sees 1.2 turbo under the bonnet and thinks the only question is whether it has enough power for the motorway. 6 months later, a warning light appears. The garage starts talking about oil pressure, belt debris, turbo lubrication, and the engine's service history. Suddenly, Daniel understands the question he should have asked before buying. Not, is this engine modern, but what does this exact engine need in order to survive? This is an investigation, not a blacklist. We will use Fiat, Jeep, Toyota, and Citroën as examples, but we will not pretend that an entire badge is reliable or unreliable. Toyota does not get a free pass because of its reputation. Citroën, Fiat, and Jeep do not get condemned because they share a corporate group or an engine size. The central question is simpler and more useful. Why can a modern engine feel brilliant at 20,000 miles, healthy at 40,000, and then suddenly become expensive, even when its owner believes they have looked after it? The answer arrives at the end. It is not one part. It is a chain of small decisions. And the documented Citroën case near the end shows exactly how a design detail, maintenance and oil can meet in the same place: your wallet. The first lie, full service history, means safe engine. A full service history is valuable. It is not a force field. Two owners can both say, truthfully, that their car was serviced on time. One does 15,000 motorway miles every year, gives the oil long hot runs, and lets the engine complete its normal operating cycle. The other does 4 miles to school, sits in traffic, stops the engine, restarts it, and repeats that pattern all winter. The stamp in the book can look identical. The life inside the engine is not. Old engines often had more tolerance for imperfect habits. They were generally less power-dense, less turbocharged, less dependent on ultra-low viscosity oils, less packed with emissions hardware, and less likely to combine direct injection, start-stop, and a tiny oil capacity in one family car. That does not mean old engines were indestructible. It means they had more room between not ideal and damaged. A modern engine is asked to do more with less. Less displacement, less fuel, less emissions, less friction, often less warm-up time before the driver reaches the next red light. The engineering can be excellent, but the tolerance for neglect is smaller. So the first question before buying any modern petrol or diesel car is not, has it been serviced? Ask, what was the use pattern? What oil was used, and did the service schedule match the actual life of the vehicle? There are 3 details worth checking before you believe a service record. First, are the dates sensible, or did the car go long periods with hardly any mileage and no annual service? Second, are there invoices, not only stamps? And third, does the mileage progress make sense for the type of car? A 3-year-old family SUV with tiny mileage may be a cherished weekend car. It may also be a vehicle that spent most of its life on short, cold runs and then sat outside. You're not trying to prove the seller has done something wrong. You're trying to understand the life the engine has already lived. That is a much better predictor of ownership risk than the phrase "only one careful owner." That sounds almost too simple, but it leads directly to the component that modern owners underestimate most: the oil. The second lie: oil is oil. On an older engine, owners could sometimes get away with thinking of oil as a generic consumable. On many modern engines, the oil is part of the design. It lubricates bearings, carries heat away from stressed components, operates variable valve timing systems, protects turbocharger bearings, and in some engine designs lives in direct contact with a timing belt. The correct oil is no longer merely about viscosity on the bottle. It is about the manufacturer's exact approval and the chemistry the engine was engineered around. This is why a cheap oil change can become a very expensive saving. A bottle may say it is suitable for most modern petrol engines. That phrase does not mean it meets the precise approval your engine needs. The wrong formulation can change how deposits form, how a belt ages, how a turbo is protected, and how emissions equipment behaves. You do not need to become an oil chemist. You need to become suspicious of vague invoices. Before buying used, ask for itemized service invoices. Find the oil grade and, where shown, the manufacturer approval. Engine oil changed is not the same as proof that the correct oil was used. And if you own the car already, do not create your own maintenance schedule from internet arguments. Follow the handbook for your exact engine code. If your driving is predominantly short, cold, urban journeys, ask an authorized specialist whether the severe use schedule applies. The answer may not be the same for every Fiat, Jeep, Toyota, or Citroën, even when the badges look similar. Do not let somebody sell you a false choice between manufacturer interval and change it every few thousand miles no matter what. The correct answer lives in the manual for your engine and in the conditions the manual calls severe. Towing, stop-start traffic, repeated short runs, dusty use, and long idling can matter. The calendar matters too. Oil ages even when the odometer barely moves. And be careful with additives. A product may have a legitimate role in a specific maintenance plan, but it cannot make an incorrect oil correct. It cannot restore a damaged bearing. It cannot turn a contaminated system into a healthy one by the next morning. When a bottle is being used to avoid finding the cause of a warning, it is no longer maintenance. It is delay. Oil is the bloodstream. The next problem is what modern urban driving can quietly put into that bloodstream. Short trips. The engine never gets the chance to finish the job. The damaging journey is not necessarily the long motorway trip. It is the journey that feels harmless because it is so short. Cold start. 4 minutes of driving. A school run. Stop. Later, another cold start. A supermarket trip. Stop. A few miles of traffic. Stop. In that pattern, the engine may not spend enough time fully hot for moisture and fuel contamination in the oil to reduce in the way the designers expect under normal operating conditions. The battery may never properly recover. Exhaust after treatment may not complete every cycle. The oil gets older in a different way from oil that sees regular long journeys. This is not an accusation that every city driver is destroying their engine. It is a reminder that low mileage is not automatically gentle mileage. An engine with 20,000 city miles can have had far more cold starts, heat cycles, and stop-start events than an engine with 50,000 motorway miles. The practical warning signs are easy to miss because they are not dramatic. The cooling fan running after a short journey, the oil level changing unexpectedly, a petrol smell on the dipstick, a growing number of warning lights, a diesel that frequently seems to be doing something unusual after the ignition is turned off. None of these proves a failure by itself. Together, they tell you the car deserves a proper look rather than another month of denial. This is also why a car with very low miles can be the more dangerous used purchase. Low mileage without the right kind of use and maintenance can be a story of underwarming, not preservation. There is a useful ownership habit here. If your car mostly does short trips, build in a regular longer drive only when it is safe and convenient, and do not assume this replaces servicing. The point is not to race the car down a dual carriageway. The point is to give the engine and exhaust system enough steady operating time to do the work short journeys constantly interrupt. But do not use a long drive as a ritual to explain away a real symptom. A warning light, a change in oil level, or a genuine drivability problem deserves diagnosis first. A motorway trip is not a fault code reader, and once the oil is carrying more stress, the smallest high-speed component under the bonnet becomes less forgiving of every mistake. Turbos, more torque, less margin for bad habits. Turbocharging gave small engines the torque drivers wanted without the headline fuel consumption of a larger engine. That is why a 1.0, 1.2 or 1.3 turbo can now pull a family SUV in a way that would have sounded impossible 20 years ago. But a turbocharger lives a hard life. It spins at extraordinary speed, relies on clean oil and is exposed to intense heat. When the engine is driven hard from cold, when oil changes are delayed, when the correct specification is ignored, or when a lubrication issue begins upstream, the turbo is often one of the first expensive parts to feel it. This does not mean you should be frightened of every turbo engine. It means you should stop treating a turbo car like an old, naturally aspirated runabout. Give it the right oil. Do not demand full load before it has warmed up. Do not dismiss a new whistle, smoke, power loss, or warning light as just turbo noise. And never assume a turbo failure is automatically an isolated turbo failure. If a turbo has been replaced, ask why. Was the oil feed inspected? Was the cause of contamination found? Were service intervals and oil specification verified? Replacing the expensive component without solving the reason it failed is how an invoice becomes a pattern. The used car clue is often hidden in the wording of an advert. Turbo replaced can be reassuring only when it comes with paperwork and an explanation. Recent engine work without invoices should make you slower, not more confident. The repair may have been done properly. You simply do not have evidence until the history explains what failed and what was checked around it. This is one reason modern engines appear to fail suddenly. The failure may feel sudden to the driver. The conditions that created it can have been building for months. But there is another modern design choice that creates a different kind of hidden problem. One that has nothing to do with how carefully you warm the turbo. Direct injection. The part of the engine fuel no longer washes. Many modern petrol engines use direct injection. Instead of spraying fuel into the intake port, they inject it directly into the combustion chamber. This brings important efficiency and emissions benefits. It also changes where the fuel goes. On a conventional port-injected engine, fuel passes across the back of the intake valves. On a direct injection engine, it does not. That means you should be cautious when anyone promises that a bottle poured into the fuel tank will automatically clean every deposit from the intake side of a modern engine. That does not mean direct injection is a bad design. It means the maintenance conversation has changed. Oil vapor, crankcase ventilation, repeated short running, and the engine's overall condition can matter more to intake valve cleanliness than a single premium tank of fuel. If a direct injection engine develops rough idle hesitation, misfire codes, or poor response, do not self-diagnose it from a social media clip. Those symptoms can come from ignition, fueling, air leaks, sensors, injectors, deposits, or many other causes. The useful question is whether the garage has diagnosed the actual fault, rather than selling a generic cleaning treatment. This is particularly important when somebody says, just use premium fuel. A quality fuel can be a sensible choice in the right context, but it cannot promise to clean a surface the fuel does not physically wash in the same way on a direct injection design. The best preventive action remains the boring one. Correct oil, correct intervals, an engine that reaches temperature, and attention when its behavior changes. Modern engines reward precision. They punish one-size-fits-all thinking, and nowhere is that more obvious than a timing system that sits in oil, because there, the wrong oil and a degrading component can meet before the owner hears anything at all. The documented case: Citroen's previous PureTech 1.0 and 1.2 engines. This is the part where we stop speaking in general principles and look at a documented manufacturer program. Citroen's UK PureTech customer support platform says the company extended coverage in March 2024 for previous generations of PureTech 1.0 and 1.2 engines. The program concerns certain repairs involving oil pressure issues resulting from premature degradation of the timing belt and slash or excessive oil consumption. Citroën says the coverage can extend to 10 years or 112,000 miles for parts and labour, subject to conditions. That is not an internet rumour, it is a manufacturer statement. It also does not mean every PureTech engine will fail, every Citroën has the same timing system, or every owner automatically qualifies. What it does teach us is the real lesson of modern engine durability. A timing belt is not just a maintenance item when it operates in an environment affected by oil chemistry, age, and service history. If belt material deteriorates prematurely, debris can contribute to an oil pressure problem. And oil pressure is not a small warning. It is the thing that separates a lubricated engine from an engine beginning to damage the parts you cannot see. If you are considering a used Citroën, Peugeot, or DS with a previous generation PureTech 1.0 or 1.2, do not ask the seller, has the belt been done? Ask for evidence. What is the exact engine? What is the VIN? Which oil was used? Were the intervals followed? Has the belt been inspected or replaced according to the applicable schedule? Is there any historic oil pressure warning, oil consumption complaint, or repair claim? And can the manufacturer's support eligibility be checked before you pay? That is not paranoia. It is the correct level of detail for a used engine whose manufacturer acknowledges a defined support program. There is one more trap. Owners often hear wet belt and immediately inspect any rubber belt they can see under a cover. That is not enough. The relevant design, inspection process and oil requirement are vehicle-specific. A pre-purchase inspection by somebody who knows the engine is more valuable than a seller pointing at a belt and saying it looks fine from the outside. But now comes the mistake that traps buyers of newer Fiat and Jeep models, seeing the words 1.2 turbo and assuming every engine with that number carries the same history. Fiat and Jeep, why the badge and engine size are not a diagnosis. Fiat's current 600 hybrid is advertised with a new generation T-Gen 3-cylinder turbo engine. Jeep's current Avenger e-hybrid is advertised with a 1.2-litre turbo e-hybrid powertrain. To a buyer scrolling through listings, the shared number, 1.2, can look like the entire story. It is not. An engine family can evolve. Timing hardware, lubrication requirements, software, hybrid systems, emissions equipment, and service instructions can change between generations. A current 1.2-litre Fiat or Jeep should not be condemned simply because an older previous generation PureTech support program exists for a different application. Equally, it should not be bought blindly because the salesperson says they fixed it. This is where most used car research collapses into slogans. Never buy a 1.2. All 3 cylinders are bad. It is a Fiat engine. It is really a Peugeot engine. None of those sentences tells you enough to spend £15,000 or £25,000 safely. The correct process is less exciting and much more powerful. Identify the exact year, exact powertrain, exact gearbox, and exact engine code. Ask a brand specialist or authorized dealer which maintenance schedule applies to that VIN. Ask whether there are any campaigns, software updates, revised parts or service bulletins relevant to that vehicle. Then read the service invoices, not just the stamps. Fiat and Jeep are not the villains of this story. They are the warning against lazy pattern matching. The same lesson applies to Toyota, a brand that many drivers place at the opposite end of the reliability spectrum. Toyota, the reputation that can make owners too relaxed. Toyota has earned a powerful reputation for long-lived engines. That reputation can be useful when you are comparing used cars. It can also create a dangerous sentence in an owner's mind. It is a Toyota, it will be fine. No engine benefits from that sentence. Toyota owners still need the exact oil specification, the exact service schedule, and the right response to the way the car is used. A hybrid used largely for short urban trips may spend its engine life very differently from a petrol hatchback living on the motorway. A low-mileage Toyota still needs time-based servicing, and a warning light, a falling oil level, unusual noise, or a coolant loss is not less important because the badge is Japanese. Toyota is useful as the control group in this investigation. It shows why the phrase "modern engines fail early" is too crude. The same pressures exist across the industry: lower emissions, higher efficiency, more electronics, thinner oils, higher cylinder pressure, tighter packaging, and greater dependence on prescribed servicing. The difference is not magic. It is how each engine is designed, how the owner uses it, and how quickly small faults are caught. The right conclusion is not that Toyota engines are immune. The right conclusion is that a reliable brand cannot rescue an owner from the wrong oil, missed calendar servicing, repeated short trip abuse, or an ignored warning. And now we can finally answer the question at the start. Why do modern engines seem to fail so early? The real reason: modern engines fail in chains, not in one moment. The real reason is rarely one catastrophic event at 60,000 miles. It is a chain. The car does short journeys. The oil works harder than the mileage suggests. The owner follows the longest possible service interval because the car has low miles. The wrong oil or a vague service invoice removes another layer of certainty. A belt, a turbo feed, an injector, a sensor or an emissions component begins to create a small symptom. The owner waits because the car still drives. Then one warning light turns into a diagnostic bill, and the diagnostic bill reveals an engine problem that feels as if it appeared overnight. That is why the owner says modern engines fail early. The engine did not necessarily fail early. The warning chain was allowed to run too long. This does not excuse a documented design issue. Citroen's PureTech support program exists for a reason, and owners of affected previous generation engines should use the VIN, service records and manufacturer process, rather than hope for the best. It does mean that the same fear should not be sprayed blindly over every modern Fiat, Jeep, Toyota or Citroën. Here is the practical checklist before buying any modern petrol or diesel car. First, identify the exact engine and powertrain. not just the badge and engine size. Second, get invoices showing the oil specification and service dates, including time as well as mileage. Third, check the VIN for recalls, campaigns, warranty extensions, and support programs before you hand over money. Fourth, ask how the car was driven. Short journeys, long storage periods, and city-only life matter. Fifth, treat oil pressure warnings, unexplained oil use, coolant loss, rough running, and abnormal turbo noise as reasons for diagnosis, not reasons to buy a bottle and hope. And sixth, if you are buying a car with a known documented issue, the price must pay you for the risk. A cheap Citroën or Jeep is not cheap if the history is missing. A Toyota is not safe if the maintenance has been guessed. A Fiat is not risky because of one internet comment. The exact vehicle is the only vehicle you are buying. The normal buyer sees a small modern engine and worries that it will not last. The smarter buyer looks for the system around it: oil, timing, turbo, driving pattern, service evidence, engine generation, and manufacturer support. That is the new normal. Modern engines can last a long time, but they do not forgive vague maintenance as easily as the old ones did. So do not buy the myth that every modern engine is disposable. And do not buy the even more expensive myth that a modern engine needs no attention because the service light has not come on yet. Buy evidence. Buy the exact oil history. Buy the correct engine generation. Buy the car whose owner noticed the first warning instead of hiding it until trade-in day. Tell us in the comments what car you own, which engine it has, how many miles it has covered, and what maintenance problem, if any, surprised you most. Does your experience support the idea that modern engines fail earlier, or does it show that careful ownership still wins? Subscribe if you want to avoid bad used car buys, hidden engine risks, and repair bills that could have been prevented before they reach the workshop.